The town of Marrowick was not the kind of place anyone put on a map. It was small, almost secretive, its narrow streets folding into one another like crooked fingers, and its people carrying their secrets as heavily as the groceries. On its eastern edge, beyond a veil of crooked pines and a sagging stone wall, lay the Graywick Cemetery. The cemetery was older than the town itself. Some said it had been there before the settlers, before the war, even before the land was charted. It was a place of silence, where moss grew like velvet over cracked gravestones, and the air carried the faint, metallic tang of rain, even on the driest of days. Most townsfolk avoided it, not because of ghosts, but because of the stories. Whispers passed down over decades claimed the cemetery could grant wishes. But there was always a price. Evelyn Harrow had never believed in those stories. At 17, she was practical to a fault. Her world was homework, her younger brother Jacob, and the suffocating grey weight of grief that had swallowed their house since their mother's death. Her father drank too much now, coming home late from the factory, his shoulders slumped, his voice either too sharp or eerily silent. Jacob had stopped smiling altogether. Evelyn often felt she was the only thing holding the pieces of her family together, though the pieces kept cutting into her hands. It was on one of those restless nights, when the silence in their house felt unbearable, that she found herself walking. She didn't know why she went east. Perhaps because the moon was pulling her, or because the whispers of her classmates still clung to her ears. They had dared one another. Go to Graywick. Make a wish. See if you come back the same. The iron gate screeched as she pushed it open. The air inside was different, colder, as though she had stepped into a pocket of the world where seasons didn't obey. The trees leaned over the graves like watchful guardians, their shadows long and clawed. Evelyn tightened her scarf and walked deeper. That was when she saw it. A headstone taller than the rest, its surface black as obsidian, polished despite the years. No name was carved into it, only an inscription etched in letters so sharp they looked fresh. One wish, one price. Speak it aloud. Her heart quickened. She almost laughed. It was too theatrical to be real. Too childish. Yet something in her, the part of her that remembered Jacob's hollow eyes, wouldn't let her leave. Her voice was unsteady. I just want my family back, she whispered. I want things to be like before. The wind shifted, carrying a smell of roses where no roses grew. The ground beneath her feet trembled faintly, and then all was still. Evelyn stood frozen. Nothing had changed. She shook her head, muttering at her own foolishness, and turned back toward the gate. But when she returned home, she found her father sitting at the kitchen table, sober for the first time in weeks, his hands folded. Jacob was at his side, laughing softly over a story about school. The weight in the house had lifted, just slightly, and Evelyn realized the cemetery's whispers were true. For 3 days, life felt different. Her father shaved, combed his hair, and left the whiskey untouched. Jacob's smile returned, faint but real. Evelyn felt as though she had stepped into a dream. On the 4th day, she woke to the sound of screaming. She ran to Jacob's room and found him clutching his leg, blood seeping through his pajama pants. His skin had split open from knee to ankle, as though clawed from the inside. The doctors at Marrowick's clinic stitched him, but they couldn't explain how the wound appeared. It looks like tearing, one muttered, baffled. Her father's newfound sobriety cracked under the stress. Evelyn sat in the waiting room. The cemetery's black stone burned into her memory. The wish had worked, but it had taken something in return. Days later, Evelyn couldn't stop herself. Grief and guilt twisted together like vines around her throat. She found herself back at Graywick, under the same crooked moonlight. The stone gleamed, waiting. Her voice trembled. Please, she said, take it back. Heal him. Make him whole again. Again, the rose-scented wind. Again, the faint trembling of the ground. This time, Jacob's wound closed overnight. He woke as though nothing had happened, his skin smooth, his laughter brighter than before. But that very evening, Evelyn's father collapsed at work, his lungs seizing. The doctors called it a sudden onset of pulmonary fibrosis, rapid, aggressive, and without cure. The cemetery had healed one life only to unravel another. On her 3rd visit, Evelyn was not alone. A figure stood by the black stone, tall and thin, dressed in a coat that looked stitched from shadows. His face was pale, eyes too dark to reflect the moonlight. You're meddling too often, he said, his voice like dry leaves. Evelyn froze. Who are you? Keeper, he replied. The one who watches the bargains. The cemetery listens, but it does not care. I, however, keep tally. Her chest tightened. You mean the price? He tilted his head, studying her. Every gift must be balanced. What is given must be taken. The more you ask, the sharper the cost. I just wanted my family back, she whispered. And so you will lose them, piece by piece, until you learn restraint or until there is nothing left. For weeks, Evelyn tried to resist. But reality pressed harder. Her father's cough worsened. Jacob's laughter grew thinner. She found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts consumed by the cemetery's promise. One wish, one price. Her classmates gossiped. Some claimed their parents had gone there once, asking for wealth or success. One boy whispered that his uncle had asked for love and been found dead weeks later. Heart stopped mid-beat. Yet Evelyn could not stop thinking, what if I asked for health? For strength? For time? One night, when her father coughed so violently he spat blood into the sink, Evelyn broke. She wrapped herself in her coat and slipped out under the veil of stars. The cemetery welcomed her like an old friend. Her voice cracked as she stood before the stone. Save him, she begged. Take whatever you want. Just save him. The rose scent filled her lungs, almost choking. The ground trembled violently this time, enough to rattle the gravestones. And then silence. When she returned home, her father was breathing evenly, the color back in his cheeks. He smiled at her, a weary but grateful smile she hadn't seen in years. Evelyn's relief was overwhelming, until she opened Jacob's room and found the bed empty. On the wall, carved as though by invisible claws, were the words, "The debt has been taken." The next morning, David woke with the taste of dread on his tongue. He half convinced himself that last night had been a dream until his phone pinged again with a message from the hospital. Stable. No complications overnight. Discharge possible next week. It was impossible. His father had been told he might never leave the hospital bed again. Yet now, suddenly, hope was real. David stared at the glowing screen, hands trembling. But then he remembered the whisper from the gravestone. Every wish is answered, but every answer demands its due. He tried to ignore it, diving into work, meeting deadlines, pretending to live as before. But the weight of the cemetery's secret pressed against his ribs. By evening, the need to know pulled him back. The cemetery looked different in daylight. The iron gates stood open as if expecting him, the gravel paths stretching between leaning stones that seemed too close, too crowded. Moss clung to the names of the forgotten. He wandered aimlessly until he reached the same grave where he had whispered his desperate plea. The cracked stone was ordinary now, just another forgotten marker. But when he touched it, his skin burned with cold. This time, the whisper came instantly. You returned. Good. The first debt is not yet due. But every debt arrives, and soon. David stumbled back, heart pounding. What do you mean, debt? The grave was silent. The words had faded into nothing. That night, as he drifted into uneasy sleep, the whispers returned, this time in dreams. He saw children running through the cemetery, laughing, their hands brushing the stones as if they were old friends. But when they turned to look at him, their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. One child spoke with a mouth that didn't move. We wished too. We paid. So will you. David woke gasping, sheets drenched in sweat. The next day, his father called him. David, the old man said, voice strong, clear. They're sending me home. Can you believe it? Tears of relief welled in David's eyes. That's amazing, Dad. That's everything. But even as joy filled him, something inside twisted. Because miracles weren't free, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the cemetery was already watching him, already choosing how he would pay. That evening, as if drawn by a spell, David returned again. And this time, he wasn't alone. A woman in her 20s stood by another grave, her lips moving soundlessly. Her hands trembled as though in prayer. When she turned, their eyes met, her face pale, eyes wide with a fear he recognized in himself. You hear them too, she whispered. David froze. You've made a wish. She nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. And I regret it every day. Elena awoke to the sound of scratching at her window. She sat upright, sweat dripping down her temples. The dream still clung to her like wet cobwebs. Her father standing by the headstone, whispering her name, but his eyes hollow, his smile wrong. The scratching grew louder, a frantic rasping. She pulled back the curtain. Nothing but the night, and yet her breath caught. In the glass, faintly reflected, she saw the silhouette of a man behind her. She turned. Empty room. Her heart hammered. This wasn't grief. This was something else. Something alive. The next morning, she went back to the cemetery. The gate creaked open as though it had been waiting for her. And there, by the mausoleum where she had whispered her wish, a boy no older than 12 sat cross-legged, tossing stones into the dirt. You made a wish, didn't you? He asked without looking up. His voice was too old, too steady. Elena froze. What? He smiled at her with teeth too sharp. Everyone does. That's why they come here. But you have to feed it, you know. The cemetery doesn't grant gifts for free. Her stomach turned. Feed it. The boy stood, his shadow stretched unnaturally long across the ground, spilling over graves that weren't his. You'll see, it always asks for more. That night, the phone rang. She answered, her voice trembling. A static hum filled her ear, followed by her father's voice, weak, breaking. Elena, her knees buckled. Dad, not enough, you promised. The line cut. Tears blurred her vision. She stumbled toward the window, staring out at the cemetery. The shadows seemed to move between the stones, restless, hungry. And for the first time, she understood, the boy was right. The cemetery hadn't brought her father back. It had only brought something else, something wearing his voice, something that now wanted to be fed.